you very much. You're all very welcome back to the EO webinar after our short summer break. It felt like a very short summer. We were just saying September rolled around real quick that time. And yeah, we're delighted to have two talks from National Parks and Wildlife Service today. We have Gemma Weir and Michelle Mulomby. And yeah, they're going to kind of introduce themselves. So Gemma, would you like to kick off there? We'll just stop the questions when you're finished and we'll move on to Michelle's talk then.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and thanks so much for the invite. We're very excited. Myself and Michelle, we're going to do a joint gig here today. We're probably the two oldest women in NPWS. I think I differ in that I'm quite a lot older than Michelle in terms of our women in geospatial in NPWS. So it's great to be here. Thanks a million. So I'm just going to kick off and go through this. So yeah, as Jenny has covered, that's me, and I'm in NPWS and I work in the Spatial and Scientific Data Unit with Michelle. So I'm basically going to just give a quick overview of my career, my current role within NPWS, and then just give a flavour of NPWS geospatial data. So just in terms of my education, so my background, I have a primary degree in geography, and I would have studied GIS under Krisha Ribachuk. So she was an early adopter, so we would have done a few modules in GIS back then. And I would have done some more GIS then when I went on to do a master's in environmental sciences, also in Trinity in Dublin. I then went into the world of work, and probably kind of mid-career, I then did an MSc, a part-time MSc in DIT Bolton Street, now called TUD. And that was in spatial information management, and it was a fantastic course. Really, really enjoyed it, and I found it very, very useful. Certainly for myself in my line of business. More recently, during COVID, I also did a part-time higher diploma in science and computing, focusing on web and cloud technologies, and that was with Dublin Business School. It was entirely virtual, and I actually never met anybody in person from the whole course. So it was a very odd experience, but it was great to do as well. Yeah. And it stood well to me. So just in terms of my career history, I suppose, just this is a quick flow diagram, just a quick sketch. So those three boxes in blue are when I finished college and I was working in the private sector. So I would have worked in the ICON group. I would have worked on the Area Aid, doing a bit of remote sensing, kind of GIS technician type of work. Also in Gemma, where I would have worked as a GIS technician. And I was one of the initial three involved in the setting up in terms of Compass Informatics, along with Paul Mills and Garoda Rian way back in the day. I moved on from that as a contractor, as a GIS technician into the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and the Islands. And I was working to Maurice de Butler, he was a fantastic boss, and I really enjoyed my time with him on a contract. And at that time, our role was across the whole of, I suppose, the department. We didn't really differentiate into different business streams. So I would have had experience in a little bit of national monuments information or built heritage information, as well as the natural heritage side of things. So it was a really great experience, and it was a great way to get an understanding of the organisation and the different sections in the organisation. I became permanent in 2001 as a GIS technician. I continued in that role for a while, and then I had an opportunity. I worked in the nature conservation planning section, and I worked on setting up, I suppose, the GIS environment there to ensure that we were capturing a lot of the data that was needed for the planning, and also really trying to build up, I suppose, trying to ensure that people understood that this was an environmental database we were building up rather than just generating outputs for maps, that we could use this information again. So that was quite successful. And some of that has now kind of fed into what another stream of work called site-specific conservation objectives. I then moved on to the monitoring unit, and I had applied for a position as a wildlife inspector, which is the kind of scientific officer grade, and that's the entry grade that I started in the NPWS scientific monitoring unit. And I really enjoyed it. I was also using some of the skills I had accrued probably in my master's in environmental sciences. I would have done my thesis would have focused very much on the ecology of kind of blanket bogs, and looking at kind of interaction between farming and peatland habitats and conditions. So I was delighted to be working in the monitoring unit. And at the time, we were preparing for the first of a series of national reports under the EU Habitats Directive. So I was bringing in my kind of my GIS skills to support the team in doing that first time round. A little bit more about that and on. After that, I continued in the monitoring unit for almost 10 years, and I then had an opportunity to go on a secondment, and I worked with the student grant system in the City of Dublin ETB. They were working on developing a new grants process, an integrated grants processing application system. So that was really, really interesting. It was a pure ICT project, very large, very integrated project. So I was just there temporarily on a maternity cover secondment. I returned to NPWS, and I would have worked then on the next, I would have worked in between that period on another of the Article 17 and Article 12 submissions, came back in 2018, and we had another submission in 2019 of Article 17 and Article 12. So that was a focus of work. And I then became the Ecological Data Manager in NPWS in 2019. I continued in that role until 2023, when I became a senior wildlife inspector, and I, with some organisational changes, I was asked to take on the lead on the spatial and scientific data unit, which was a new unit that was created under restructuring. So in terms of a little bit about NPWS, for those of you that mightn't be familiar. So we're an executive agency. We're in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. We are in the Heritage division of that. So the others that we have been bedfellows with in the Heritage division is the National Monument Service and the National Built Heritage National Built Service, Built Heritage Service. So I suppose just from an NPWS perspective, our primary responsibility is in terms of nature conservation, wildlife protection, and the preservation and protection of our presentation of our national parks and nature reserves. So these would be the state-owned properties. We're also responsible for the designation of a network of sites that are required to be protected under EU legislation, and also some that are under our own national legislation, such as NHAs under the Wildlife Acts. And these designated sites and these networks would be a combination of primarily privately owned and then some state-owned areas, such as the national parks and nature reserves that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I mean, the key legislative and policy drivers for NPWS, there's the EU Habitats Directive, the EU Birds Directive. There are others Those in bold are the ones that NPWS really has a lead. I won't go through all of these. So from the EU perspective, then from the global perspective, we are signatories to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, also then Ramsar Convention, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or often abbreviated to IPBES. And there are a number of other conventions that we're signatories to as well. I've just mentioned a couple there. And then just the national implementation, some of this is an implementation of the EU directives. So the European Communities, Birds and Habitats and Natural Habitats Regulations would be an example there. We also have the Wildlife Acts and their amendments, most recently in 2023. And in terms of policies, then we have our National Biodiversity Action Plans, and we're on the 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan, which covers the period 2023 to 2030, which was published earlier this year. Also Heritage Ireland, which would span not just NPWS, but it would also be kind of those other sections in heritage that I mentioned. So I suppose just in terms of today, so I'm working in the Spatial and Scientific Unit, and you can see that's myself and Michelle there in yellow. We work in the same unit. And we're part of a new directorate, which is called the Engagement Corporate and Specialist Supports. And this is a directorate that's kind of been set up. So NPWS was set up as an executive agency in 2022. And this new directorate, so there's been a whole reorganization, and this is a new directorate that was set up completely new then. And so the GIS and biodiversity or ecological data sides of the house have come together under this new unit, under this new directorate. So that's it. So we have a small team, and we have GIS officers, GIS technicians, we have GIS remote sensing data manager, and a biodiversity data manager, and we have biodiversity data specialists. And some of these are relatively new roles, so like within the last 18 months. So we're trying to build up our capacity. But in tandem, NPWS is growing. It has received more resourcing in recent years, which is really, really welcome. But there are additional demands. And we also rely on some support in terms of contractors as well, which is really, really helpful. Okay, so what does the job entail? Well, my role as a senior scientific officer heading up the Spatial and Scientific Data Unit kind of typically includes liaison with departmental ICT on infrastructure and security and management of the shared heritage and NPWS GIS systems and applications. So we are very much reliant on ICT. They manage the infrastructure. We may manage the software, but it will sit on a platform that is either managed by a Department of Housing ICT, or it may be managed by DPERS, the Office of the Chief Information Officer, so OGCIO. So that can make things a little bit complicated sometimes. OGCIO, their focus is on supporting many government departments, and so they're very, very much focused on security and avoiding risk, etc. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge where you're trying to deal with data integration. A little bit more about that again. Also role in terms of internal communications, coordination, and that's especially important, I suppose, since that restructuring I mentioned is just to let people know who we are and to know what kind of services we have, and also some of the process and procedures that we have, the governance we have in place. So we have we are responsible for the spatial and scientific data management policies, standards, and processes within NPWS, and we try and work with our colleagues to make sure that these are workable and usable for them, as well as achieving good practice in data management. We also are responsible for the management of the data on a day-to-day basis, and also providing kind of desktop GIS licensing training. We manage the scientific data repository, for example, which would be kind of the top copy from some of the surveys either we would undertake ourselves or we would outsource. We also provide a service in terms of data acquisition, so typically like geospatial data acquisitions, like aerial imagery, satellite imagery, and also licensing or data sharing, for that third-party licenses, so our contractors can access the information that we have purchased, for example. We're also trying to build up our capacity. We were an early adopter, certainly in terms of remote sensing, but it's, it has certainly been an issue. We haven't had capacity to really develop operationally in this area, and it's a real growth demand, as you can imagine, in an organization like NPWS, and you'll see a little bit why. So that's something we're trying to do now as our team is building. So we also are responsible for national data coordination. So you're going to hear things like the Article 17 or NCA, National Conservation Assessment. These are, and Article 12, these are articles of the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive, which specify certain reporting requirements, and our team are responsible for the coordination on that. We also would collaborate quite closely with the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and indeed are a funder of that. And we would see that that's really a shop front for all biodiversity data, whereas NPWS might have to prioritise and focus on particular areas relevant to our roles and functions. We also provide scientific advice both internally and to other bodies and agencies in relation to aspects of data management for nature conservation. So we would have been involved in the past, and we expect to be again in terms of collaboration, for example, with the Heritage Council on best practice guidance on habitat mapping. We also would have been very centrally involved in the preparatory work for what became the National Land Cover Map, which was led then by Táil Éireann, or OSI, and the EPA. We also would have done pilots, for example, on ecosystem services mapping and assessment, and we also contribute in terms of the current review, the land evidence review, and a new piece of legislation which has recently been approved, so the nature restoration law. So we're going to be very much, I suppose, supporting, guiding NPWS colleagues in terms of the requirements around the National Restoration Plan data elements. So I suppose really NPWS has it's a complex range of responsibilities ranging from policy and advisory to operational functions. In terms of our activities, they vary, so we from inventory, which would be like the survey of the extent and distribution of important biodiversity areas, and then designating a representative proportion of these. So we talked about some of those designations already, such as the Natura sites under the EU and EU Birds and Habitats Directive, so SACs and SPAs and also NHAs. We'd also be involved very much in communicating to relevant stakeholders and landowners in terms of their rights, so notifications. So that might involve us supporting the collation of information on townlands and notifications. NPWS is not us specifically, but it's important that we are communicating to landowners about the value of areas, why they're important, where they're important, and why. And as we mentioned already, we're responsible for the management of state-owned areas and trying to ensure that actually state-owned areas become exemplar, if not already, in terms of nature conservation. We're also responsible for enforcement and regulation, so and to try and ensure that areas are properly managed so that the assets, the biodiversity assets, are maintained in a long-term favourable status. And as part of that, we would certainly be involved in undertaking surveillance and monitoring, and looking at change detection over time, and then trying to ensure that the appropriate management is in place. Also involved in outreach activities, for example, dealing with, we have a lot of education officers that will be involved, and work with the data centre, and also with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. We also would have worked with the data centre in terms of developing a national vegetation database, national vegetation classification, and so on. So this is just to kind of show you some of the flavours of the scales and varieties of some of those things, looking at the outreach and management, and dealing with some ongoing issues. And that just summarises really what I've covered there in terms of those elements of our activities. So I suppose really we're looking at a very broad range of legally protected and policy relevant features, and habitats, and species that are the scope of what we have to look at. And these have very different requirements in terms of monitoring and data capture. So over here we have a lesser horseshoe bat in a cave, then we have a hare, and we actually have a larval web of a marsh fritillary butterfly. So these are all protected under the Habitats Directive. And you can see, obviously, there's different approaches that would have to be taken in terms of looking at either monitoring for bats or looking at habitat for species, etc. Some other examples would be where we're dealing with woodland. So this is an example from Killarney. This is a lovely bit of the woodland down there. Three-dimensional. So it's multi-dimensional features. Other multi-dimensional features which can be a challenge might be, for example, our offshore reefs. So this is a photo showing some beautiful sea fans from a reef survey. And you can imagine, obviously, that's a challenge in terms of accessibility. This was on my holidays last week in Kerry. So this is actually a salt marsh system, and it's a dynamic system. So it can, and we also have a lovely bee orchid from a dune system nearby. So they're kind of quite dynamic systems, and can change quite quickly. So that can be a challenge in terms of monitoring, and some other areas can be, very remote and quite inaccessible. And so this is an upland area near Slieve na Lecha, also in Kerry. And the challenge of trying to monitor and assess and map that, as you can imagine, is not insignificant. And such areas, this has got a lot of blanket bog, and blanket bog by its nature is correlated with cloud cover. So therefore that is a challenge in terms of either aerial imagery or optical sensors for trying to use those for mapping and detection. So I suppose in terms of how we support NPWS in its data capture and data management, so we are responsible for the structured or scientific data stores. So we have a scientific data archive or data repository. We also manage the reference data stores. Now, this would be a shared resource across heritage. We would also be responsible for the data standards process and governance in NPWS. And that would include like the standards, master data modeling, databases for, habitat surveys or species surveys, also trying to increase integration between our geospatial and other data types. Advice, we've covered that already. In terms of spatial, and we're responsible for a lot of the open data publication relation to the spatial and scientific data, and some of that can be accessed through our website and on to other avenues like data.gov.ie, GeoHive and National Biodiversity Data Centre, as I mentioned. We'd be involved, so to support the monitoring and remote sensing aspects, we would be responsible for the procurement or coordination in terms of imagery and storage, and some validation and QA, maybe some Less so actually in terms of ground control surveys, equipment, property, drones certainly increasing in terms of use in NPWS there. In terms of applications, and I know Michelle is going to talk a little bit more about some of the applications, the mobile and desktop applications and viewers. We also would have kind of data repositories or database applications such as this SRD is the Sites Registry Database, an inventory of all of our protected sites. A Recorder 6 is a piece of software for the management of observations. We also will be involved in supporting and licensing and training in that. We talked already a little bit about some of the analysis and reporting. So move on.
Gemma, just to let you know, we're coming up to 1:30, so.
Okay, I won't be too long. Okay. Okay, so some examples of data products. So this is just an example from Clara Bog, where it's showing an archive. So we have the one site, and we have an archive survey. This is a very old survey, and then we've more recent surveys, and we've some drone surveys as well. So we might have data that's actually collected over different times, different scales, etc., which can be a bit of a challenge, especially when looking at change detection. And this is just a close-up of some of the species that you're seeing on that site. Okay, this is where we can get access to some of the information, and that's I'll just show you some of the examples of a data package. So this would be from a species, or a habitat survey, where you can download the package, and then you can actually see the contents in that. So we'll have a combination of reports, we'll have spatial data, we'll have maybe database applications, we'll have maybe map outputs, PDF outputs, and we may have other data types that might be specific around supporting kind of vegetation monitoring and assessment, such as Releve data, TurboVeg, Recorder. That's just an example of some of the outputs that we would get, where we're looking at trying to map to these annexed habitats protected under the directives, but also other general habitats as well, and looking at the kind of monitoring indicators. And that's just showing some interlinkages. So between our NPWS designations viewer, our sites, we can actually link from there directly to other content on our website, which will provide further information such as related publications, and that would provide further information such as further site-specific reports or imagery, for example. Our metadata, we additionally publish the metadata through ISDE GeoNetworks, and that's then harvested to data.gov.ie. We also will provide, in addition to downloads, we also will have various map applications, and I'll let Michelle kind of go through these in a little bit more detail. Just to say, Article 17 we've mentioned, so there are reports associated with that, there are viewers associated with that, and there are spatial data downloads associated with that and with associated metadata. And this is just a quick view, a snapshot of some of the content we have there, just to show you this kind of scale. So what we report to Europe and these grid cells, that's the specification, but we also provide the information in detail that's used to come up with those grid distributions. And this is just an example, but you can see there, that's just summarizing the kind of level or volume of information associated with that. So, and that's just showing a view of a close-up of some of the more detailed information that's there. You can see, and you can gather more information and make links then to other resources that I've already shown you. And that's just an overview of areas that we've surveyed, and just showing on the terrestrial only. Obviously, we have some marine surveys as well in our viewer, which I think Michelle might talk about. And a lot of this information is then harvested by the European Environment Agency into their viewers. They have some great applications nowadays. They've done some really, really good work where they've linked between their experience builders and Tableau views as well for dashboards. It's really, really nice. So just very quickly, this is just showing the interaction and the complexity. So we have, in terms of habitats and species surveys and the various different data components. We have database, we have spatial data, and we've also other formats, and we have then other reporting. So there might be inputs and outputs, and then there might be repositories and archives, and then this will go out. Some of this is synthesized and is output as a report, for example, to the European Environment Agency. Some of it's going to our NPWS, also to NBDC and to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. I won't really dwell on that. It's just showing an overview of our infrastructure, and just to show the image says it's complex. This is a shared infrastructure across heritage. And that's leading me on just to very quickly say, we're currently going through a digital transformation for the Heritage Division, and that's looking at trying to come up with an integrated, spatially enabled digitally heritage protection platform. As part of this, NPWS were asked to take a lead on commissioning a GIS and remote sensing review for the Heritage Division, and that was commissioned by us, and it was commenced last autumn, and it concluded then just earlier this year, and it was led by John Hewitt of Geolytical Limited with Compass Informatics, and we're now in a phased implementation of that, aligned with that 2030 vision that I mentioned. That's just some days and numbers. I think what I'll summarize here is that we got massive input from people. We conducted lots of surveys, we got loads of response. There's huge enthusiasm and interest in this. Also some frustration, people want to be able to access more, do more, and there are challenges around that, but that's hopefully what the recommendations coming out of that. So really the recommendations we're covering 4 areas in terms of people, governance, technology and data. Resourcing obviously is a key one there, skills development, governance certainly, to try and look at what we can do. We do have some kind of good standards and procedures, but there's certainly room for improvement. And then looking at our resources, certainly in terms of storage, it's becoming a massive issue just in terms of the volumes of information, network limitations and being on different domains. And as we've said, you can see from the complexity there, it's a challenge when your data is quite fragmented, and it means that you're limited in terms of doing much processing. Am I okay to go for another two minutes?
Oh, yeah. Well, you're cutting into Michelle's time, but
okay. All right. I can actually, so I won't go through this then in great detail. There are a number of recommendations there under 5 themes and a phased approach. And so really, this is just showing the application landscape as is, and you can see the complexity. Now, this is all a heritage, but really where we're looking to go to is the 2B, where we're actually looking at much more addressing some of those key issues in terms of data storage, system integration, and more holistic data governance to allow more efficient data access and use. A data hub is obviously a key part of that, but also looking at the data transformation and analytics and visualization and reporting there. So really, I wasn't planning to go through this in detail. It was just to kind of give a flavour of that variety and complexity, but trying to put manners on it. And that's just a summary of the phase 1 in terms of the technical architecture. So we know we have to do an upgrades, and that includes things like our ArcGIS Enterprise Portal, some consolidation of our AGOL. Also just continue to work. We're going to be looking at ArcGIS Hub, looking at trying to improve the situation in terms of resources and governance, and also in terms of some areas where low-hanging fruit, where we can actually improve our data quite quickly, looking at our field data and overcoming some of those obstacles. And I think Michelle will talk a little bit more about that. So that's me. Okay.
Thank you, Gemma, and thank you for that. A very complex system, as you say. We'll go straight into your talk, Michelle, and if we have time for questions at the end, we'll take some questions. If anybody does have questions, I don't think you can unmute yourselves, but you can put a question into the chat. So please feel free to do that as we go along, and we'll ask them at the end.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay.
There we are.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to present here today. as Gemma said, we are very delighted to be representing National Parks and Wildlife Service. So my name is Michelle Mulomby and I'm a GIS officer in NPWS, which is, and I'm working in the Spatial and Scientific Data Unit, as Gemma showed in her overview chart. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about my career to date, what my day-to-day tasks entail, and then a short technical talk about the implementation of WebGIS in National Parks and Wildlife Service and some of the advantages and challenges that we have experienced. So I qualified with a Bachelor of Science Geography in 2010 from UCC. I did my dissertation on the Cabra wetlands, which are located just outside Thurles and Tipperary. As part of that dissertation, I actually utilised GIS to quite an extent. And I think at that point realised I would very much like to do a master's in GIS. So started that in January of 2011 in the National University of Ireland, Maynooth. So from January to May, we were in lectures, and then for the summer we had to undertake work experience. So I did 2 months placement in Compass Informatics, where I was contracted into the National Transport Authority of Ireland and worked on the Journey Planner for Ireland. And then I did another 2 months in the Ordnance Survey in the Phoenix Park. And my role there involved digitising features in the Prime2 geodatabase. So qualified then in December of 2011. And then began my search for a GIS job. But in the meantime, I worked in the Lisheen mines. They're located outside Thurles, and I actually had worked there for all my summers and the gap between my undergrad and my master's. So I was very lucky because there was actually a mapping section in the geology department. So I used MapInfo to map the location of the kind of the ore bodies, and it was very interesting indeed. But in March 2012, I started as an actual contractor in National Parks and Wildlife Service. So actually was a contractor up until 2019, at which point then there was a position advertised for a permanent position, and I applied for that. So I've been permanent staff member, GIS officer in National Parks and Wildlife since 2019. My role in NPWS has been varied. I've worked in a number of different business sections. When I started, I was in the designations unit, so I would have been involved in digitization of boundaries for special areas of conservation and special protection areas. And then in more recent years, my role has very much been involved with ArcGIS Online, so the administration of those platforms and the implementation of that WebGIS technology into existing NPWS workflows, and also seeing how they could be applied to new workflows. So my day-to-day role, as mentioned, involves administrating our ArcGIS online platforms. We have a US hosted one, a EU hosted one, and a new NPWS dedicated one. And additionally, we have an on-premise ArcGIS enterprise platform, which we call which is referred to as Map Portal. So I would receive a number of requests on a daily basis from regional staff based across all of Ireland. So we have conservation rangers and district conservation officers. They'd have a number of different ad hoc GIS queries. Also, I would provide technical advice and guidance to members of the SASTU team. And I guess a lot of WebGIS is finding bugs and then finding ways to fix them and sharing that advice so we can get a resolution nice and quickly. Again, then as well, just I suppose maintaining, administrating the online map viewers, troubleshooting issues when things break or things go down. Very importantly, and I'll touch on it again, is staying up to date with the emerging GIS technologies and trends, especially in terms of functionalities around surveys, the Esri Field Map app suite, and looking at how those improvements and additional functionalities might be actually quite beneficial to us in NPWS. So understanding the workflows that are existing and how WebGIS can be implemented. And then finally, I do work on a number of specific projects. One example is the invasive species mapping project, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So in 2015, ArcGIS Online was introduced into the NPWS. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with it. For a quick overview for anyone who mightn't use ArcGIS Online or be familiar with it, it is a cloud-based mapping and analysis platform. It consists of a number of different items, and each item is different type. So you have feature layers, you could have hosted images and forms, web map applications, which are more commonly referred to as map viewers, and then groups, which can be used to control access to the viewers. So without a doubt, since we have introduced it, it has had a transformative effect on several different NPWS workflows and business areas. It has certainly proved to be an effective tool for capturing, displaying and managing data, as demonstrated in a number of the slides in Gemma's previous presentation. So today I'm just going to look at 3 key areas where I feel the implementation has been particularly successful and beneficial. Also, I will address some challenges that we encountered during the implementation phases and offer a quick discussion around the solutions that we developed in order to address those challenges. So 3 key areas that certainly benefited from WebGIS are field surveys, desktop surveys, and online map viewers and dashboards. So in terms of field surveys, I've further broken it down into trail surveys, species surveys, and then invasive species surveys. With the desktop surveys, we're going to take a quick look at some public engagement surveys. And then finally, when it comes to dashboards and map viewers, we'll look at the internal ones and then some public-facing ones as well. So the first example here is the Raven Nature Reserve down in County Wexford. So the interesting thing about this project was it was completely undertaken during COVID, during lockdown, when we were very limited. So it just goes to show the beauty of being able to work with ArcGIS Online and how I was able to set up a survey in Dublin, and then the user, the conservation ranger, was able to follow the user manual and go out and capture the trail, which is seen here as the red line, using the Esri Field Map app. It was actually called Collector at the time, but it's been since revised. And then once that data was captured, I was able to visualize it in ArcPro and then produce a map which was required to be printed into a large poster and displayed at the car park. So it was a really great example of how previously, before WebGIS, users might have used a Garmin handheld device. And that, of course, had its limitations in that the Garmin had to be plugged in and data downloaded, etc. Whereas this was quite a seamless interaction and was a quite successful project. Additionally, another example is the Killarney National Park tree survey. So this used a different Esri mobile app called Survey 123. The beauty of this was that I was able to upload some pre-existing data, and I guess it could nearly be called a resurvey because the user required the ability to go back to previously surveyed trees to see their current condition. So it was a quite successful project. There was a total of 238 points collected or resurveyed, 331 photos captured, and a PDF was generated automatically using functionality in Survey 123. Again, when compared to previous methods, for example, maybe a Garmin, or indeed it might have been an Excel spreadsheet and just going back to previously surveyed sites, because each tree had a small little metal plaque and a unique code on it. Again, it showed that the benefits of this new technology and how it really streamlined the process. Just one more example in terms of field surveys is looking at the species surveys. So in 2017, there was a requirement for the GIS team to assist with a colonial nesting species survey, which was to be undertaken down in County Kildare. So one of the beauties of this was that the ability to upload pre-existing spatial data layers, in this case, 5 kilometre square grids, so that the surveyors could see these on the app, along with aerial imagery, and then also be able to capture the location of the nests. So just a quick note on the methodology. Generally speaking, when it comes to survey designs, we would finalize a conceptual survey, then perhaps ask 1 or 2 users just to test it out and provide feedback. Then we create the actual survey, publish it up to ArcGIS Online, set up ArcGIS Online accounts, create a user manual, and very often an online map viewer or editor, and then finally distribute the survey and hold a training workshop if necessary. So here on the left, you can see what the actual field survey looks like. This is the online map viewer, which very often contains additional functionality. So it might allow the user to tidy up if they're only possibly doing some quick draft work in the field, or indeed add in additional layers, maybe a previously captured scientific survey, which provides more information. And then that's just a screenshot of the user manual that I put together for the surveyors. Again, it was quite successful. Indeed, sometimes at the very beginning, there was a small bit of apprehension around using a new app and fear of deleting the survey by accident. But with the user manual and the training session, all the surveyors came on board and agreed that it was certainly a real advantage to be actually able to see aerial imagery, as opposed to perhaps previously with a Garmin, for example, that they mightn't have been able to have that level of additional information out in the field. So the results of that were published by David Tierney in our birds unit in volume 9 of Irish Birds Manual. And then a final look in terms of field surveys is invasive species surveys. So without a doubt, I think this has been one of the biggest projects, and certainly one that has involved staff across the entire, across all our regions. So we set up a working group, and we discussed, developed and adopted a standardized schema for the capture of invasive species, for example, what attributes and what classification system to use. And then we deployed it via the field survey map. Each conservation ranger is issued with a smartphone when they start, so it's wonderful in the respect that they don't have to, make sure that they have a separate handheld Garmin, that we know that they'll be able to download the app and sign in once they have been assigned an ArcGIS Online account. Again, when it came to visualizing the data as it was captured in live time, senior management certainly benefited from the dashboard application on ArcGIS Online, so they could see where the data was captured and levels of infestation, etc. So without a doubt, there has been certainly a lot of advantages associated. A lot of these I've touched on already. The fact that, the data is captured in real time, and that, again, it was positive feedback around being able to view aerial imagery. Now, in terms of challenges, right, so unfortunately, mobile data coverage was without a doubt our biggest challenge. A lot of areas, remote areas and boglands, etc., did not have any mobile data signal or mobile data coverage. So we had to work to find a way to be able to still present the same level of, I suppose, quality data in the field survey, but offline. So our solution was to create high-resolution, offline-enabled aerial image tile packages. So we contacted Ordnance Survey, and we got a national cached data set of the aerial imagery of Ireland, and then we cut up tile packages according to the different administrative areas that certain rangers were working in, etc. And in more recent times, we've been able to set up a self-serve because there has been, as Gemma alluded to, a lot of change and movement in the organisation. So the fact that people can download the area that they're going to be working in, wherever that may be, really has been very beneficial. Another thing that there was a little bit of hesitation around was some users expressed concerns that they mightn't have the ability to easily access and have control over the field data. So previously, if it was an Excel spreadsheet in hand, you know, a paper map or something like this, they'd easily have the data just whenever they wanted it. So we addressed these concerns by presenting users with access to map viewers and ensure that these map viewers had tools such as export to shapefile or export to CSV. And they were very user-friendly, and again, set up made sure to include user manuals and information widgets, which included instructions. Another challenge was, and I think Gemma certainly touched on this when she mentioned about monitoring surveys, is trying to recreate an existing survey that was perhaps set up in a paper format and then bring that into the existing technology, which is Survey 123, for example. So we encountered this with the Corncrake survey because sometimes it was the same bird but cited in a different location. So we needed to be able to link that back to the first recording because it wasn't two separate birds, if that makes sense. So again, trying to figure out the functionality, how that can be set up in the back end in Survey 123 Connect. And certainly since the very first Corncrake survey 2017 to date, the functionality has definitely been improved, and Esri are constantly releasing updates, which really has been beneficial, particularly to us for a lot of our data, for a lot of our survey needs as well. And again, another thing then, another challenge was the fact that very often the surveys are designed, but on a yearly basis, they need to be redesigned. For example, an additional species might be added to, need to be added to a drop-down list, or for example, the areas covered have changed, things like this. So basically, we have designed a diagram that shows the general process of how we speak to the business owner, how we assess what the requirements are, redesign or design it in the first instance, then redesign after a year, publish it, etc., and just, you know, do some user acceptance testing and then amend or deploy as required. So I think overall, from what I've been saying, it's safe to say that when we receive requests, it isn't just a mobile survey that we are being asked to create. It's also ongoing technical support, and also there's an entire life cycle associated with that data, and there's a requirement to, you know, perhaps in a year be available to review with the team what changes they might require, etc. In terms of desktop surveys, again, we have been able to utilize the Survey 123 software to publish public-facing surveys. So I just took two examples, two very different ones. The first one is a primary school's geoform for Corncrake sightings on Tory Island. So it was just an effort to try and engage more children with their school teacher to record where they saw or heard, well, mostly heard the Corncrake, and to zoom into the location on the map and then to submit it. So, you know, it was important to make sure that it was very straightforward and simple, and it just captured the necessary data, etc. And then the second example is the Irish Rare Breeding Birds panel. So in 2018, I was involved with creating this online survey, which is still in use today. And it has indeed proven to be quite a useful tool for public engagement, with over, I think, 400 sightings recorded to date. Previously, these sightings would have been submitted solely maybe by email or other formats. But the nice thing about this is that all the data is collated in real time, and we set up a login for the owners of this survey so that they can see the data and visualize it as well. So that's just what the survey looks like. And here is just one screenshot from the analysis tool that is in Survey 123 that shows, you know, what are the main ones being recorded, but it does have a lot of other functionality as well. So
just to let you know, there's 5 minutes left in the webinar time. So
thank you very much. I'll speed it up a little bit. So again, advantages are the fact that it is a standardized survey reduces the risk for errors, typos, etc., because we're using drop-down menus, and senior management or survey owners can certainly easily access the data as it appears. And then just moving on to the third and final area, which is online map viewers and dashboards. So an example here is the Clarny National Park fires of April 2021. So this was a map that I created using satellite imagery analysis. And in order for senior management to be able to visualize it, then it was loaded into an online map viewer, which is one of the main benefits is that users do not need a special GIS software to be uploaded, or sorry, to be able to view this, which is the beauty of it. Again, then we have an internal map portal, which is fantastic for sensitive data or GDPR compliant data sets. For example, Property Registration Authority with boundary reviews, raised bogs, turf cutting plots, and then again for internal staff so they can have a view of their habitats or a view of a variety of different data sets. We have a lot of nice story maps, which are brilliant for engaging the public and showcasing the beauty of the national parks. It has different media elements like audio, etc. Again, national parks and wildlife destinations viewers are most popular one. And again, advantages, it's user friendly, and you know it provides a lot of decision-making tools. For example, around the roado, you can plan conservation measures or clearance works, depending on which areas are showing most infestation. Some challenges, internet connectivity can be limited, rural offices, also functionalities. We're very much, it's out of the box, so we're kind of limited in that respect. And then Esri are also retiring templates every now and again, which means we have to redesign. So in conclusion, it has a very positive impact, WebGIS, across a number of different areas. Reduced the amount of post-processing work. Standardized schemas have been a real benefit. It's been easier to roll them out. Data sets can be visualized for the public instead of just providing them as shapefile CSV downloads. So we will continue to keep up to date with the implementation of our new functionalities as they emerge, so we can continue to deliver quality products. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you both for speeding up there at the end so we could cover all the material. It's fantastic. We are kind of out of time. If anybody wants a very quick question, you can throw it in the chat there. I have a very quick question for you, probably Gemma, maybe. Are NPWS responsible for marine biodiversity? You did mention that you have some marine surveys, but who does that responsibility fall to? Is that you guys or the Marine Institute or?
Yeah, no, NPWS would have a responsibility for the habitats and species that are marine offshore, but obviously our department also has a responsibility in terms of marine protected areas, and there's other legislative responsibilities that they have. But certainly for us, also obviously SPAs, a lot of our seabirds are protected under the Birds Directive as well.
Okay, great. And Michelle, I presume you have like a very good working relationship with the ArcGIS and the Esri people. Is there a flow between you guys and the people developing the softwares?
Yeah, well, a lot of the time I find the forums are probably my first place to go when I have an issue, and sometimes as well the bugs can be actually in the software initially, and then users are kind of finding the bugs. So that's why certainly within our own team, we find it very helpful to share what we find with each other. It's just as shortcuts really. But yeah, I wouldn't have too much interaction with Esri Inc. or Esri Ireland directly myself.
Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat, and we have kind of reached the end of the webinar. So thank you very much, ladies. That was fantastic to see all the work that you're doing there, and great to see the NPWS getting resources to do this work. It's fantastic. And we will be back next month on the 2nd of October. And we will be announcing the speakers for that shortly on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Gemma.
Thanks very much.
We look forward to seeing you all next time.